This video is part one of a series on the gender wage gap.
For why the wage gap is women's fault is that they choose to enter lower paying professions.
When you compare men and women in the same positions and with the same experience, the same education, there is no pay gap. You need to look at, yes, what the position is, and you need to compare apples to apples, not pick and choose.
Okay, apples to apples. Okay, well, in which case, I actually have a question for you. How do you like these apples?
A recent study out of Yale University that is interesting, where professors were given the identical resume. One had the name John on the top, and one had the name Jennifer on top. And the male candidate was rated more favorably.
Really?
And they were offered on average $4,000 more than the female candidate.
Okay, so it seems we either address the root of this problem and fight entrenched sexism in our society, or all women simply change their names to John.
The paper from Yale University that John Oliver is referencing is an interesting one. However, this paper suffers from a serious methodological flaw. In this video, we'll dive into the paper and discuss the major problem with it. The paper is titled "Science Faculty's Subtle Gender Biases Favor Male Students." In the experiment that this paper describes, the experimenters made a sample application for a student applying to be a lab manager. They then asked 127 university professors to evaluate the application. 63 professors were given an application that had a male name, had gender male on the application, and used male pronouns. 64 professors were given the identical application, but with a female name, gender female, on the application, and female pronoun. The professors were asked to give different measures of the applicant's competence. The results indicated that faculty participants viewed the female student as less competent and less hireable than the identical male student. Faculty participants also offered less career mentoring and a significantly lower starting salary to the female student, even though the resumes of the female and male student were otherwise identical except for their gender. One thing that stuck out to me here was the low p-values. The p-value is the probability that these results are explained by chance, and their p-value is less than 0.1%, which is impressively low. It indicates that they believe they have found a real effect here.
Classic. Women are paid less because they choose to have children, although, to be fair, they didn't technically choose to be the sole gender biologically capable of pregnancy, with the notable exception, of course, of seahorses and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jr.
So, does this study prove the gender wage gap thesis? At first glance, the study does seem compelling. Applications that are identical except for the gender of the applicant yield significantly different results. I understand why the authors believe that their experiment proves the gender wage gap thesis, and I also understand why they didn't recognize the potential methodological flaw with their study, because they are ideologically incapable of realizing it. But before I get to the flaw, I want to go over one other part of the study. The authors calculated a competence measure for the male and female applicant that was based on how the professors rated the applicants in terms of their fitness for the lab manager job, the applicant's likelihood to do well, etc. Their findings, quote, "Our results revealed that both male and female faculty judged a female student to be less competent and less worthy of being hired than an identical male student, and also offered her a smaller starting salary and less career mentoring," end quote. And also, quote, "Our mediation findings shed light on the processes responsible for this bias, suggesting that the female student was less likely to be hired than the male student because she was perceived as less competent," end quote. In other words, the female applicant was less likely to get the job, and if she did get it, she'd be paid less because the professors rating her perceived her as less competent, and both male and female professors perceived the female applicant as less competent than the male applicant. In fact, if you look on the right-hand side of the competence table now being shown, you'll see that female faculty rated the female student lower in each measure compared to how male faculty rated the female student. So clearly we must be witnessing internalized misogyny from the female professors. Okay, let's get to that methodological flaw. What you're looking at now is the application that the professors were asked to evaluate, the female version of it. Imagine you were evaluating this application. How fit is the person to serve as a lab manager? What information is going to give you a good signal as to their fitness for the job? Their grades and test scores are above average, but not exceptional. This person is probably smart enough to be a lab manager. They have supportive letters of recommendation, so you know that they're capable of asking people for letters of recommendation. Their personal statement shows that they can write, but what else is there? What other information can provide you a signal as to how good or bad this person would be as a lab manager? To answer that, let's go to a different study, a study titled Women in Tech from the National Center for Women. What you're looking at now is a bar graph that's showing the rate at which women leave their STEM field jobs over time. Quote, female attrition is higher in technology than in science and engineering. In all cases, the quit rate for women is higher than it is for men. In the high-tech industry, the quit rate is more than twice as high for women, 41%, than it is for men, 17%, end quote. Now, I don't know if lab manager is high-tech or not, but the general trend is very clear. Women are significantly more likely to leave STEM jobs than men. This next graph from the same study shows the percentage of women who remain in their STEM job per year. What this graph illustrates is that after 2 years, which is the period of time that the lab manager position is intended to be for, after 2 years, 20 to 30% of women will have left their STEM job. Not just left their STEM job, will have left the STEM field, including their job. Do you see the methodological flaw now? Let me put it this way. Suppose that instead of changing the genders of the two applicants, the authors let the applicants have the same gender, but on one sheet they wrote, "Every morning I use my asthma inhaler," and on the other sheet they wrote, "Every morning I use illegal drugs." I suspect that they'd see a difference in that case too. Professors would rate the illegal drug user as being less competent, less fit for the job. They'd want to pay the illegal drug user less.
Wait, are you saying that being a woman is like using illegal drugs?
No, but what I am saying is that regularly using illegal drugs is likely to have a negative impact on your ability to do a job well. Likewise, if 30% of women leave their STEM job in the first 2 years, then being a woman is an indication that you will be more likely to leave your STEM job in the first 2 years than a man would be. The authors note that the difference in hiring and salary was largely explained by the fact that professors considered the male applicant more competent than the female applicant. Well, one aspect of being competent, of your ability to do your job well, is not quitting your job. 20 to 30% of women not only quit their job, but also leave the STEM field in their first 2 professional years. Professors are presumably acquainted with their students and able to figure out trends like women are more than twice as likely to leave high-tech jobs compared to men, and evaluate accordingly, even if the professors are evaluating unconsciously. In other words, if the professors knew about this trend, even if they couldn't articulate the statistic that describes the trend, they may still evaluate applications based on it. The reason that this is a methodological flaw in the study is because the authors ignore the possibility that gender is a relevant attribute when considering the competence of an employee. If, instead of gender, the authors had listed likelihood that the applicant will quit within 2-year period, and for one applicant they wrote 30%, and for the other applicant they wrote 10%, it would not be surprising that the applicant who was less likely to quit was evaluated higher. So why is it surprising, or why is it indicative of sexism, if you simply obfuscate that statistic by calling one applicant female and the other applicant male, when terms like female and male correspond to different likelihoods of quitting your job in the first 2 years? The professors in question must surely realize this significant trend, even if they are not consciously aware of the statistics. Now, before I close, I'd like to deal with what I suspect the author's rebuttal to my point would be. They also measured the professors for sexist attitudes using a series of questions from the modern sexism scale. They found that the more sexist a professor was, the greater the disparity in how that professor judged the male and female candidates. This, the authors believe, shows that the difference is not based on a real signal in competence, like I'm suggesting, that you might get from a candidate's gender, but on sexist attitudes against women. The problem with this is the modern sexism scale that the authors use to evaluate sexism. Here's a quote from the paper. Participants responded to 8 items on a scale ranging from 1, strongly disagree, to 7, strongly agree. Items included, on average, people in our society treat husbands and wives equally. Discrimination against women is no longer a problem in the United States. And, over the past few years, the government and new media have been showing more concern about the treatment of women than is warranted by women's actual experiences. End quote. Remember, 1 is strongly disagree and 7 is strongly agree. The scale is evaluated by summing your answer and concluding that the higher the sum of your answers are, the more sexist you are. In other words, the more strongly that you agree with those statements I read, the more sexist you are. The more you think that husbands and wives are treated equally in our society, the more sexist you are. The first thing to note about this is that the modern sexism scale has 8 items in it, and the paper notes that 3 were included. Now, perhaps that's simply poor wording on the paper's part, but to me it suggests that there is at least the potential for hacking the results here. For example, if you asked the full 8 questions and there was not a correlation between negative attitudes towards women and how you rated the female candidate, then you could simply exclude questions until you found the correlation you wanted, and you might be left with 3 random questions from the modern sexism scale. However, my main response to this potential rebuttal from the authors is that these statements don't really indicate sexism. I think the modern sexism scale is dubious at best. Instead, what they indicate is a belief that the world is not sexist. Imagine if you were a university professor. You'd live in a world of academia with ultra-liberal people, co-workers, and students. You might well live in a world where husbands and wives were treated equally. But if you think that they are, then you're a sexist. What if, instead of these people being sexist, they are just perceiving the world more accurately? Yes, husbands and wives are treated approximately equally, and, all else equal, it's better to hire a man for a STEM job, as the man will be more likely to remain for the full duration of the position. That is, the woman will be more likely to quit, and she'll quit after 1 or 2 years when you've invested time training her, building her up, and she's ramping up to her full potential. Then she'll quit, which may mean that gender is an accurate signal for competence for a candidate for a STEM job. The authors would mistake candidates seeing the world more accurately, candidates who think husbands and wives are treated equally, and that men are better for STEM jobs. The authors would mistake that for sexism. Perhaps they'd understand my explanation as sexism as well. After all, I am saying that all else equal, it would be better to hire a man for a STEM job. And yet, I would reply to them by saying that they are actually being sexist, and I'm not. Men and women have different aptitudes and preferences. Men may be better inclined for STEM jobs, just as women may be better inclined for jobs like nursing, pediatrics, or teaching. Sexism is not recognizing differences, like I'm doing, but instead it's insisting that men's attributes and men's interests are superior to women's. That's not what I'm doing at all. The authors believe that there should be more women in STEM, and in this way they are valuing male aptitudes and male preferences over female ones. They are implicitly asserting male superiority to women, and thus they are actually sexist. My position is that men and women should be free to follow their own interests and desires, even if that results in different occupations being performed predominantly by different genders. Therefore, my position is truly about equality. Both men and women should be equal to pursue the careers however they see fit, even if that means there are fewer women scientists. Therefore, my position is truly about equality, and theirs is about forcing women to behave like men. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by clicking the like button. If you want to see more content in a similar style, then go ahead and click subscribe. Thanks for your time.